Cheers.
Thanks for coming on. You're a busy man right now.
Post-COVID, and it's interesting. There's a lot to do. As long as we're able to get more wines out there and people are enjoying them, then I think it's all worth it.
I think that enjoying them is probably the understatement of the century. I would imagine. I didn't realize, I've run wine lists in restaurants for a long time. I didn't realize until I went to work retail just how much people love your whole collection of wines across the board. I made a joke early on. I said that you couldn't kill Joe's wines if you tried to. You couldn't do anything to stop them.
Well, I think that's very nice. I'm glad people like them. I think that our philosophy is very simple. It's when we're blending, we're blending for our personal tastes, just as much as anything else. But we're never focused on the critics. I don't worry about that. I figure I'm an American. Everybody on my team is an American, and we all grow up with something maybe of a similar palate. But if it tastes better to me and the rest of the team, I think that it's going to be a style that's going to resonate with the general public here in America, and that's what's brought us our success, and that's what we continue to hang our hat on. But when people drink the wines and love them, I mean there's no better feeling than knowing that people are enjoying your wines, and it's hopefully making a difference in their daily lives.
So I do want to touch on a couple of things. One, if I'm understanding correctly, you launched Belle Glos before you were even old enough to drink. Is that right?
That is true. Yes.
You kind of smashed right out the gate.
Yeah. Yep. And it was you're legally, people don't know this, but you can legally produce alcoholic products, right? Wine, spirits, beer, before you're 21 years old. You just can't consume that legally. So that's the interesting part. But so I started about 19 years old.
And so, as you started with Belle Glos, you moved on to Naomi, and kind of just became a household name. I would imagine there's been no greater name in the world of Pinot Noir. I mean, you have really changed the landscape.
Yeah, changed it completely. We see other people's styles changing.
Of Pinot Noir across the board. I mean, you can't be blind to that fact, right? I mean, you have to acknowledge that's completely changed.
I mean, I would think that maybe it's not so much trying to emulate our style, but I think that people see that the general public, I always go back to everybody in Napa Valley that was producing Cabernet in the 60s and 70s, they were trying to emulate Bordeaux, because that was like the end all be all, right? And then they realized that Napa Valley had its own terroir. Pinot Noir went through the same thing, and in many cases it's still going through that. So I think that whether it's people looking at our wine saying that, I want it to taste more like that, or it's just a simple fact that I do think people like the style of a richer, bolder Pinot Noir, and so they're maybe following the market, right? More so than anything. But it's, in the beginning days, it was actually tough. I believed in what we were doing. But my first couple releases were I had like 3 vintages that were sub 80 points, like 76, 77, 78 points. Like those are undrinkable scores, and the wines weren't too dissimilar from what they are now. And it was just a reflection of the expectation of that time, was that it needed to be light, high acid, etc. And after consumers started to be the ones that, it was the customers that told us, keep doing what you're doing, rather than trying to pander to the critics. And they're them voting with their pocketbook is what gave us the belief that we're going the right way with this. And I think that more people have evolved into honoring Mother Nature and what Mother Nature gives you, more so than trying to emulate an area or another style of wine. And I think that that's good for everybody that loves wine.
So what gave you that at such a young age? What
like knowing your
said?
Yeah, your family was in the
This
business.
is what people are going to gravitate.
Like, did your dad go prune those vines or go?
Oh, well, he started me in the vineyard around 12, and then when I got to my teens, I was able to work around the winery, and so I knew what I was doing to a large degree. Planted my first vineyard at 15 on the far Sonoma coast. I spent a summer out there with this guy Charlie Pina, who was like maybe 25. Him and I just lived on the property. It was 10 acres. He'd buy me beer. I was 15, and we were smoking a bunch of weed and planting this vineyard. It's still the Taylor Lane Vineyard. I ended up buying it. It was a lease.
No shit. That's the Taylor Lane
and that's the Taylor Lane Vineyard. So that's that one's close to my heart. But my dad, he pushed me to always try new things. But he also exposed me to the breadth of like say Pinot Noir, right? We were tasting some of the most obscure, crazy, like super light Pinots that would almost be more like rosé, all the way up to the Costa Browns and the Pizzonis that are much richer in style. And I remember tasting those wines. I was like, this is where I want to go, something more like this. And it was McPhail, Costa Brown, Pizzoni. They were great wines. They were all young brands, but they were doing some awesome stuff. And we ended up kind of taking that guiding light of style and then evolving to what we wanted, what we just over time learned how to do and created, I think, a different style of Pinot Noir. Yeah.
And bottom line, you're a farmer, right? I mean,
yep. So I started in. That's what we still do, and
still farm.
This is just a hobby. The farming's the real work.
Yeah, I think somebody at your family's winery said to me one time, "You can't make good wine if you don't grow good grapes."
Yeah.
And that's the bottom line, right?
Absolutely.
And so, what drives you now to like? Are you always looking for vineyard sites? Or are you?
Yeah, so the sale of Maomi was a very successful brand. We sold it in 2015. One of the main reasons for going ahead and taking that deal was I never really made any money prior. We didn't have enough money. It was always going back to building the brand, right? So all of our revenue was being cycled back in, and it became a monster brand. And I was like, this is not what I got into this business for. It was great to have the success, but I looked at it and said, on one hand, I've got the opportunity to create this, multi-million case brand, or I can sell this brand and buy land and continue farming, invest in our facilities for winemaking, and bring all of these kind of dreams that I had to fruition. So we went ahead and took the deal and got right back into farming. We were already farming like 1,000 acres back then. Now we've gone up to about 4. So continue to purchase and plant more land, and hopefully just continue to sustain our own growth with all of our own internally grown fruit.
One thing that I do notice, and you touched on it down there, and I wanted to ask about it, but I wanted to save the questions for here. All of your wines across the board have been remarkably consistent year after year. I mean, there's very little variation, and they're constantly great. How do you do that? How do you maintain that? When so many other wineries have big variation year to year.
Well, thank you for that, because that's something we really do pride ourselves on a lot is consistency. Because vintage variation does happen, but more often than not, that is a byproduct of picking based off of sugars alone. And I think that's the important part, and that's where our name Copper Cane came from. Is that it's about the physiological maturity of the vine in any given season and the grapes, and that tells us when to pick. And we'll get variation from vintage to vintage on alcohol, but the style and character of the wine maintains. And I think that's the most important part. Picking based on sugar is just so easy though, because it is such a there's something common there where it's an easy one to call out and say it's 25 bricks, 26 bricks, or whatever time to pick. And if you're purchasing grapes or from a grower, they need something tactile like that. And so when I look at it, I just think it's not something we need to adhere to. And if we're looking for consistency in every vintage, which is something that is not like, I think it's underappreciated in the wine business in general. I like consistency, and it's something that we do strive for. And I think it really all stems from just that philosophy of Copper Cane and Willie Harvest.
Well, it's definitely shows. I was joking about it with his dad. I think, by the way, his dad's probably the biggest Copper Cane fan in the world. We joke often that we're going to get rid of every other wine and just sell Joe's wine. All the time. But we were talking about it in the shop the other day. When's the last time you had a bad bottle of Quilt? It hasn't happened. It doesn't happen.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Bad vintage.
I haven't had one myself.
They're consistent year after year. So. You're definitely killing it there. What was the move with moving into art? I mean, that had to be a big change for you as a California family.
I started looking at Oregon back in 2006, just out of curiosity, because I felt, I'd grown grapes, made wine throughout California's coast, and just thought, what would it be like up there? And I actually almost bought a property up in Willamette Valley, and ended up falling through because I think you have an offer that was above mine or something. But it was an old hazelnut orchard, and I was going to plant a vineyard up there. And I'm glad I didn't at that point. Listen, having kids and it was already hard enough to go from Napa all the way down through Santa Barbara and back and be home, and be a part of the kids' lives. So that would have stretched me all the way north as well. So we didn't get back up to Oregon until about 2012. And what brought me up there was just curiosity in the first place. But then when we started making wines, it was kind of taking our philosophy of winemaking in California and applying it to Oregon fruit. Same thing with grape growing up there. And I think what it yielded was really it was something that wasn't in the market yet. Because Oregon really they adhere to a much more Burgundian philosophy. And we are seeing now a lot of actual, young California winemakers that can't afford to start their business in California are going to Oregon and bringing
Absolutely.
that philosophy with them. And so you're seeing that landscape of wines in Oregon change really rapidly right now, which I welcome. I think it's a great thing. I think that Oregon got a little stagnant there. And I think that having some young blood, some new life up there is going to be doing very well for Oregon in general.
You have very distinctive Pinots, right? And all from different locations, right? And then the locations can vary from warmer climate, right, to a little cooler.
Yeah.
And
I'd say very cold to cool.
very cool.
But like if we grew, like we do the Elouan vineyard, but that's in Carneros, which is part of on the Napa Valley side of Carneros. But if we were to grow Pinot in like Opinol or north, like up to Calistoga in a very warm climate, the wines just don't. They're going to be thin. They're not going to have a lot of color, no weight. They're going to kind of fall off on acidity, very high pH, and so it's that mitigating factor. So up the coast that keeps us on average relatively cool temperatures. So when I say on average over the growing season, right, from bloom to harvest, you're looking at like 70s, maybe even high 60s in these areas. Napa Valley is probably high 80s. So focusing on those cool areas are very important. But there are different grades of cool, right? You have stuff that's on the far coast, like Taylor Lane, which is going to be in the 60s, and that's very marginal. And then you have areas like eastern Santa Maria Valley, which are going to be closer to the mid to high 70s. And the style of wine you're going to get from that is going to be much more opulent and rich. Like we use that vineyard as a great blending component to kind of broaden the palate of the Böen Pinot Noir. So it can be used as a tool, but as a standalone sometimes it may be a little too much.
During harvest, is that something that you guys are like having to be on top of your game because you're going to have different fruit coming at different times, or just sometimes it all at the same time?
There have been times where most of it is at the same time. It sucks. It's horrible. But generally speaking, like during harvest, we might get into doing some harvesting in late August, and then say second week of September, we get hammered for like 4 weeks straight, and then you kind of have to tail in. But the beauty of making other wines is you have like Pinot Noir to start. I mean, for us, we start with rosé and sparkling at the very earliest, and then you get into Pinot Noir. And then as Pinot Noir started to taper off, our Cabernet started to get ripe up in Napa. And so it kind of ebbs and flows naturally, but there have been years where it's been like all out, like almost like you feel like you picked 75% of your crop in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And that's a lot.
So you told me years ago, and I tried to relay this story, and I'm sure you can do a much better job than me right now. When you talk about these Pinots, they're very big and they're very bold, and the color is there, the phenolics are incredible. And you told me years ago you were using dry ice.
Yes.
Can you talk more to that? I've tried to talk about it over the years, but
Yeah, I don't think listeners would probably like to know what that would be for.
yeah.
So dry ice. I'll give you the history on it because this is a story that most people don't get to hear. When I started Belle Glos, I was doing all like half-ton and three-quarter-ton bin fermentations, right? So they're plastic, double-walled bins, but they don't have any cooling capacity. You don't have a glycol jacket or anything like that. So if a fermenter got out of hand, the temperature came up too rapidly and we're starting to burn through sugar too quickly, we would have to resort to using dry ice to drop our temperature down to slow down the fermentation. So we started seeing that those wines were much darker because not every bin, we might have been doing 4 fermenters and only one bin had a spike, and so we dropped it down. So we started realizing that the dry ice was actually freezing something in that fermenter. So we started to look into it and realized that when you freeze the fruit, at least the skins of the fruit, which is what we focus on, you're actually bursting the cell walls. And if you take a red grape and you squeeze it, the juice is clear. So all of those color compounds and all of the phenolic compounds, which are all the mouthfeel components, those are all trapped in the skins. Just about all of them are trapped in the skin. So by doing this cryo extraction, by exploding those cell walls, we're able to have a much easier time extracting during fermentation, yielding us much darker, much more mouthfeel-driven wines, and that's kind of the core. There's quite a few producers that use it, mostly on kind of the cold side, like the higher end cabs that you know about. As far as I know, we are the largest, well, with the exception of the COVID years, we're the largest purchaser of dry ice in the state. And then COVID kind of took the cake on that, because I guess they're using dry ice to back the vaccines.
Sure, yeah.
So now that that's over, we'll probably go back to number one. I don't know, but it is an integral part of our process, and it really does make a style of wine. I mean, all of the elements play a role, but that one element in itself it's a good portion of that style.
Well, I liked what you said earlier. It does add a lot to the mouthfeel. It makes it a little weightier, a little more luscious. These wines are velvet.
Beautiful colors.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know that you're on limited time today, but thank you so much for taking some time and sitting down with us.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you guys for having me. And you guys ever want to do this again, whether out in wine country or even over the internet, that's fine with me. So
All right.
I love talking about wine. I love what you guys are doing.
Awesome.
Thanks,
a
Jeff.
lot.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.